Welcome, everyone, to Coffee with a Codex. My name is Dot Porter, and I am a curator in the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books, and Manuscripts at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. I split my time between the Kislak Center and the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, which is a research and development institute founded almost 11 years ago here for the study of manuscripts, broadly defined. So we tend to, well, my focus is on pre-modern manuscripts. My training is medieval, and we do digital work, and we have manuscript collections here on the shelf. And a lot of my current work bridges the digital and physical, and Coffee with a Codex is a big part of that. So 30 minutes once a week, I take out one of our books and show it to you in a way that's a little bit different from just looking at digitized, your sort of regular photographed manuscripts. Today's manuscript is, let me look at the record. It's MS Codex 747, which is a verse paraphrase of the Bible along with a commentary. And just one more time, here is the direct link to the record for that. It was made by a person called Peter Riga, and I apologize, I should have done more research on this person and what he was up to. He lived in the 12th century, so from about 1140 to 1209, and he made this, this is just a copy of it. This is not his original copy, but he did this verse paraphrase of the Bible, including both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And you can sort of see how much of a paraphrase it is just from the size of it. So this is not the whole Bible either. He excludes Psalms, prophets, and it says some other books. I'm reading from our summary. And then the New Testament has Gospels and Acts, excluding epistles and Revelations. So it's not complete. And it's also quite heavily paraphrased. So it's much smaller. And then there is, and this was all written by the same scribe. And there are also little bits of commentary in the margin that are by another scribe, a different scribe. But it looks like it's done at about the same time. So we'll look at that a little bit more. Before we get into that, Matilda's asking about the binding. So I'm going to talk about the binding. The binding is described as a modern binding, which means that it could be 19th and 20th century, because when we are talking about really old books, modern can mean a lot of things. It is made of wooden boards, right? Like wood, solid wood. And it has this pretty nice leather that's been tacked on, and it's got some decorations in there. It's tightly bound, and you'll see this as we look through it. The binding, when I say tightly bound, it means that it's really tight where the spine is, which means that it's sort of hard to open it wide. So you'll see that it's a little bit difficult for me to do that. And another thing that happens when a book is tightly bound is it pulls at the binding itself. And so you can see these here, this is happening because the binding is so tight that just like opening and closing the book is damaging the binding. So you don't want to do a tight binding, but it's what we have. And so it's what we have. And it's actually pretty, I kind of like it. It's pretty, except for all of this that's happening. I like this binding a lot. And the wood of it is pretty cool. All right. And just another thing that's sort of fun about the binding, it does have these paste downs, which are, this is actually from a printed book, from an early printed book that we call incunables. Incunable is the word for a book that was printed in the first, I want to say 50 years. So between 1450 and 1500, which we think of as like the early years of printing. And so that's where this is from. And I assume that this it was taken out of the original binding and then reused. I don't think that someone doing a rebinding more recently would take like a fresh leaf, because you probably take it out and like keep it separate. But anyway, so there it is. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see this better. So this is, when we say verse paraphrase, this is the kind of thing we're talking about. So every page looks approximately like this. There are a fair number of initials, colored initials. There's no illumination. It's not fancy, and you can see probably just from this page, and you'll see as we get going, this is not a fancy manuscript. I know very little about the text. The name of the text is Aurora, which means dawn, which I thought was sort of interesting. That's the sort of formal name for it. And it was used, it was very popular. And so there were a lot of copies that survive. And it was used both for popular theology and as a teaching text, and for devotional reading. So any number of people could have had this manuscript made or in their collection for any number of reasons. I want to point out that the bottom, particularly the bottom corners of a lot of these pages, are very dirty. And the reason they're dirty is because they were touched a lot. And so this is one way that people who work with manuscripts can determine how much a manuscript was used, and even which individual pages in a manuscript were used the most. So you can see that this page is a lot dirtier than this one, which could mean that these couple of pages, for whatever reason, were used more heavily than the other ones, which is a kind of fun way to do it. If you're interested in learning more about that, Kate Rudy is the name of the person that you probably want to look up. So the verse paraphrase, it's sort of poetry. So you've got lines of poetry. And in this one in particular, the first letter of each line is sort of set off a little bit in the margin. And I think when we get a little bit further in, we may be able to see the ruling a little bit better. So the ruling is when, before the parchment is written on, someone will go in and basically format the page or create the layout. So you'll have lines going up and down to sort of show the scribe where to write. And I think that there's actually, in the grid of the ruling, there's this line that's set apart, so the scribe would know exactly where to write them. So here's an example. I mentioned that there's stuff in the margin. So here's another one of these marginal notes. There are some holes in the parchment here, lots of holes. You're going to see these coming through. So this is not fancy parchment. So Joyce is asking, why would the first letter be set off? This is not my expertise. So I don't know if it could just be that this is the way this particular text was written. I'm going to show you the other leaf, a leaf from another manuscript, and it does this too. I have to say, though, I have seen this in other manuscripts, and I think it may just be a way that people formatted poetry that, oh, Lisa. Hi, Lisa Fagan Davis. It likely has to do with the order of operations, text written first, then the rubricator goes through and adds the initials. Oh, that could be too. So they were added, they could have been written at a separate time. I hadn't thought about that. That's good. So back to the holes. So there's a lot of holes. This one is kind of interesting because it's been sewn up a little bit. There's been some sewing that's been done. You can see the thread is still there. The text has been written around the hole, And I think that it ripped later and was sewn up later. Sometimes you see holes that have been sewn up at the time that the parchment is made, but usually those holes are much smaller because they've been sewn together, and this one hasn't. So I think this wasn't. And I also want to point out that there's a half a hole here, and we will see the other half of that hole when we get to the other side of the quire. Because remember, this is made up of sheets of parchment that are folded and then sewn together. And you're not often reminded of that, but a hole like this is a nice reminder, because then the other half will pop up. Let's see, Anne has a question. What instrument would be used to draw lines / formatting? So it depends on the manuscript. Sometimes it's ink. Sometimes when the ruling is done, it's actually done in ink, sometimes even colored ink, which makes it a lot easier for us to see. Usually, though, it's sort of what we call blind. I can't think of the word, but it's like a blind scoring, right? So Karen says at this time it was likely silver point or scored with a bone, right? So it wouldn't be erased. It would be, and in fact, on this page right here, I can see, because it's a little dirty. Can you all see that? There's a line here, and there's another line next to it, and then there's lines here coming out. So these are the lines that the text is written on, and these are the two lines that I was mentioning where if it was on the other, so on the other side of this page, that's where those initial letters are going to be written. So this is how the ruling has been done in this one. Also interesting to see that the verse lines are not all the same length in terms of how many letters they're in there. And if it has fewer letters, the scribe is filling in the space. So they're all, just looking at the page, it looks like a solid column that's all the same length, but it's the same length because the scribe is making them that way. They're making this aesthetic choice, a specific, a choice that this is something that they want to do. Oh, here we go. Here we can see some cool ruling stuff. So these leaves have been trimmed, which is not uncommon. Trimming just means that the edges have been cut, usually at the time that the manuscript has been rebound. And so what this means is that oftentimes there's stuff that's cut off the edge, things like prick marks. So these are prick marks. These are the marks that the person preparing the parchment made. So he's actually using this as a guide. There's going to be another little mark on the other edge of the sheet. And this is what then you sort of draw the line from mark to mark. And there would also be, actually on this page at the bottom, we can see that there are even prick marks at the bottom. And then there would be matching prick marks at the top. And that's how we get these lines. They've been trimmed at the top, but you can see the little lines going up there. So that's good. Yeah, Lisa says, gotta have a straight right edge in the 13th century. It's the Gothic aesthetic, right? That's why they're filling in the edge there. So that's neat. Oh, there's a little blue. There's so much red, and then there's a little bit of blue, which is a little exciting. All right. So I tried, before we started, I wanted to see if I could figure out where the beginnings and endings of the books are, so we could look at the text a little bit. And I did not have a whole lot of luck. So I don't know if anyone here is an expert in this particular text, but they sort of seem to run together because there's all this, the initials are all sort of the same size. Let's see. What we're seeing here, I mentioned that the parchment isn't super great. And here's another example of that. This is just the edge of the animal. So in a very fine manuscript, all of the leaves, like if you're thinking about like a really nice book of hours, you're going to have leaves that are a really nice color. They're going to be like creamy white. You're probably not going to be able to see things like hair follicles, which you can see here, I think. I hope you can see that. Like signs of the animal, I like to think of them. The edge of the skin. But this is not a very fine manuscript. It's a very useful manuscript, right? Like this is a very popular text, and a lot of people touched this manuscript. A lot of people wrote in the margins and took notes. In fact, I think it's interesting that you can't really see it here. You can see it a little bit here, that the ruling was done all the way across the page. So this part was ruled where the scribe was going to write, and then you have the side rulings, but there is actually ruling out in the margin, which is an indication that even if the main scribe didn't plan on putting in a commentary of his own, there was an expectation that other people would. And in fact, this is the main scribes writing here out in the margin, taking advantage of that ruling. But then they might ignore the ruling altogether. So here's somebody coming in later and writing in a much smaller script. So not necessarily using the ruling there. I like this. I think that's an H. This is kind of interesting because we've got two different styles. And I don't know if this means this is actually two different people or if it's the same scribe deciding that he wants to do something a little bit different. I don't know. That's sort of interesting there. Does the new style continue? No, it doesn't look like it. I don't think so. Lisa is asking if the new style continues on the next page, and it doesn't look like it. So this one is sort of blocky, and these actually look more to me like the H at the top on the previous page. So I don't know. That's a good thing to look at. Let's see. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. Okay. Oh, so Lisa's suggestion about that one initial is that maybe those were left blank by mistake and someone came in much later to fill them in. That could be. The great thing is that we'll never know. So we can sort of come up with all kinds of ideas. So I think you can see, you're going to start seeing this, the tight binding is having an impact on how hard it is for me to show this to you, because it's starting to get, I just can't open it as flat as I could there. So this is a little bit strange. And the thing that I was pointing at before the camera went is these little marks in the margins that look like they're like upside down semicolons. And I don't know what those are doing. Lisa, do you know what these are doing? Because it is a form of punctuation that you see, but it seems strange to have them all up and down the margin. Yeah, generally they indicate biblical quotes. So, yeah, so I don't know. So that's sort of interesting. There's a lot of them. There were a few, and now there's a lot. And they're seeing more and more of these marginal notes. Let's see, Karen, the initials seem to be verses, except for a few which appear to be unseal. Versals are usually drawn, not written. Oh, interesting. Yeah. I don't know. There could have been a couple of different people doing the initials, the larger initials, maybe. And then here it ends. So I'm guessing, so there's a new section that's starting up. And actually I noticed this, looks like there's smaller sections. some of the I will say that I felt like I could tell when we were moving from one book to another, because some of them have much longer sections that don't have initials. And then this has sort of shorter sections here. So let's keep moving on. Let's see, because there's some really interesting places where there's some kind of amazing parchment, just in terms of, right, so we get to the middle, and this is where the binding is really causing me grief, because it's very hard to open this up. And it's also, oh, here we go. And it's also where we're getting some more interesting sort of formatting things. So these are much smaller sections with more rubrication and more of these small initials. Here we go. Let's see. Lisa says that rubric was about the Israelites leaving Egypt, so we're in Exodus. Oh, okay. Actually, that's a good spot for me to close this up for a second and show you something else, the Exodus, because we have a leaf that's from a different manuscript of the same text, but for a long time we didn't know that this is what it was. So actually this is, I'm not happy with what this the binding is sort of coming off, so I'm going to put this here. And now I'm going to move this over. So this is a leaf that is from Aurora, and for a long time, and in fact it's still written on this folder, which is where this leaf is kept. For a long time, this was described as a commentary on Exodus, which it kind of is. But then more recently, an expert manuscript person named Consuelo Dutchke looked at it, and she said, no, this is from Peter Riga's Aurora. And you can see, we've been looking at this, it's got the same format. We've got the initial, and then we have the smaller initials set apart. We have the verses. Now this one, the scribe has not been so careful in filling in the column, so it's a little uneven on the right. And you can probably see it has been reused as the binding of a book. So that's what's happening here. And leaves that have been reused as book bindings, you can always tell because there's going to be folds around the edges. Here's the spine, right? So it would have been like that. And then the edges, and then these are cut because it's easier to fold. But here you can even see, here's the prick marks there. I'm going to flip it over. Whoop. So there's the other side. And we even have a nice little marginal note there. So Lisa asks, what's the shelf mark? This is MS Call, COLL, 591, folder 5 is what it is. So if you want to take a look at that. And in this one, actually, you can see the ruling. It's ruled the same way, but you can see the ruling a lot better because it's been done. I think this has been done actually with ink here. So here's the rules, and yeah, this scribe has not been careful at all about like doing that. I'm pretty sure that this was the inside of the binding and the other one was the outside, because this is cleaner. It's cleaner than that there. And there may be, it looks like there's a little bit of writing, which would have been maybe the shelf mark written on the spine of the book. And just one more thing, because this is fun. This was originally a much larger sheet, and you can see it was, the fold down the middle was here, down the middle of that bifolium. And there's just a little bit of, maybe that's a capital P or an I that's been trimmed there, which is which is too bad, but it survives and we can have it and we can identify what the text is. So we just have a couple more minutes. Let's just take one more look at the big book. It's not really that big. Let's see. Yeah, Lisa pointed out that they used the original gutter fold as the part of the fold for reuse. So that was pretty cool. So here's just more. Oh, here it is. There's this whole section where the parchment is it's sort of odd sizes of parchment that's been here. We can also see here the difference in color from the sides. So there's the flesh side, which is the inside of the animal, and then the hair side, which has the follicles on it and tends to be darker. So that's always something to look for. More little holes that have been written around. Right, very important. And it looks like there's more marginal commentary there. Here we go. Yep, it's an interesting little book with a lot going on. Oh, and then at the end, on the very, very last page, the text ends here. And then later, people have come in and made all kinds of notes. And there's, I think earlier, there's things called pen trials, which is when someone had a new pen and they just wanted to try it out. So they're just sort of scribbling. But this is nice because it really shows you how people used the book over quite a long period of time too. So thank you all so much for coming today and taking a look at this book with me. I'll be back next week with some fun Arabic books and later and later. So everybody have a good week and take care. Bye.